Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Energy If You Know You Know, the podcast that provides a platform for the Gen Z workforce to share their unique perspectives, ideas, and aspirations as they shape the energy industry's future. Today we have with us Caitlin Latta. Caitlin graduated from the Colorado School of Mines with a degree in petroleum engineering and is currently working with BPX out of Denver as a reservoir engineer. I'm going to leave the floor to Caitlin to introduce us and tell us more about her journey. Hey, Caitlin, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited. So just to kind of talk a little bit about my journey, I grew up with two parents who worked in the oil and gas industry. My mom worked as a production operator up on the North Slope of Alaska, and my dad was a petroleum engineer who also began his career in Alaska before moving into different roles that ended up taking us all around the world. So I was born in England, then I spent a few years living in Singapore, moved to Indonesia, moved back to England, and then moved to Houston, Texas for high school. So a lot of moving around. And when I think about kind of what led me to pursue petroleum engineering, I think it did have a lot to do with witnessing my parents' journeys in the industry. I think that the stories that my mom shared about her experiences as one of very few women in the industry, particularly in the field during the 80s and 90s, had a really profound impact on me. Her resilience and determination, coupled with the exposure to STEM and international opportunities that I had through my dad's career, is really what sparked my interest in oil and gas. And I was also really drawn to the idea of contributing to the progress that women like my mom had made in breaking barriers in what had traditionally been a pretty male dominated sector. So that's why I kind of chose petroleum engineering. As far as why I chose mines, it was definitely a combination of both the school's reputation, but also, admittedly, my 17-year-old self's excitement with the prospect of being able to go skiing on the weekends. I think in retrospect, it was the right choice for a lot of reasons. I was able to get a world-class education. I made some really valuable connections along the way. And also, there's a reason that Mines has kind of a reputation for being a tough school. And so I would be lying if I said I didn't struggle a little bit, but I think that taught me a lot of stress management techniques that I've carried with me today. It wasn't easy, but learning how to balance school and life and manage stress ultimately prepared me very well for the real world. So when I graduated in 2019, I was fully prepared to move back to Houston. I had a couple job offers in Houston. I had accepted that my time in Colorado had come to an end. But as fate would have it, BPX had just moved their headquarters to Denver in 2018, and I was able to get a job with them as a reservoir engineer, which allowed me to stay rooted in the Denver community. So that's kind of how I got from my upbringing to where I'm at today.
So you kind of were able to fill that skiing on the weekend while moving back to Denver with BPX, which is cool.
Definitely. Exactly.
So you mentioned that your mom played a big role in you joining the industry and women in STEM, but I wanted to ask
Mhm.
you, how did you living abroad and the international exposure impact your decision in joining the industry in terms of diversity
Yeah.
and inclusivity and all of that?
Yeah. Um, I think being an expat kid provided me with a very unique upbringing, particularly through my experiences in international schools. I think that the diversity that I saw every day among my peers and their families
Mhm.
fostered a real curiosity in me about different cultures and ways of life. I mean, I think back to just my close knit group of friends, and they were from Sweden and the Netherlands and China and Germany and all over the place. And it was so cool to get to learn about their cultures through direct exposure by spending time at their houses and trying their food and
Mhm.
witnessing some of their families' customs. And so I think what that instilled in me from an early age was a really deep appreciation for the different qualities that people bring to the table. I wasn't raised in a homogenous community like a lot of people where everybody around you speaks the same language or eats the same food or enjoys the same hobbies. And as a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. Every single person I encountered had such a unique set of characteristics and experiences that defined them. So I got to experience from a really formative age the benefits and, quite frankly, just the excitement of learning about other cultures and ways of life. And so I think those experiences have shaped me in that I'm now able to see every person as kind of a unique individual who deserves to be celebrated for what makes them them. I don't think I developed the same sort of biases that a lot of people unknowingly develop when they grow up in a really homogenous community.
Mhm.
So I think all of that is kind of what have given me the passion that I have for DE&I, because it's just something that's very personal to me and something that has shaped my life. So I always knew that I wanted to join an industry that would expose me to a diverse group of people, because again, that's just kind of what I'm accustomed to and what I've always enjoyed. And I wanted to continue learning about the world, both by meeting people from different backgrounds and also potentially opening myself up to opportunities to travel and possibly even work in a variety of different places.
That's beautiful. And how do you contribute to DE&I with BPX currently in your role?
Yeah, BPX has something called business resource groups, or BRGs. We currently have 5 of them. I am a co-lead and helped co-found our women's network. It's Women's International Network, or WIN, we call it. So I have done a lot of work in that space, and we were actually kind of the inaugural BRG at BPX that kind of paved the way for these other BRGs to form. So I've also been able to get a lot of fulfillment out of helping the other BRGs kind of get off the ground and helping, support them and be immersed in the work that they're trying to do. So I've definitely been really active in that space, and that brings me a lot of fulfillment at work.
That's awesome. Um, Another thing regarding D&I, if you could advise employers on promoting D&I based on your background, how you grew up, and what it means to you, what strategies do you believe would be most impactful for them to implement?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, culture starts at the top. So I think that senior leadership teams should really make an effort to authentically reflect the diversity that the organization seeks and also embody the attitudes and behaviors that they're promoting. Once they have that covered, I think they should actively seek diverse talent through inclusive recruitment practices and revise their hiring processes to eliminate any biases. So, for example, BPX, in partnership with WIN, implemented a policy that requires hiring managers to have a diverse interview panel in order to ensure the comfort and psychological safety of the interviewee, and also ensure minimal bias on the side of the interview panel. So that's one very tangible way that you can contribute to, equitable hiring practices.
Mhm.
I think they can also establish training programs to try to raise awareness and understanding of diverse perspectives and experiences. So, for example, my team recently did a safe space training led by our Pride Network, which is one of our BRGs. And the conversations that we had were so brilliant. And I think people left with a new understanding and perspective on the experiences of LGBTQ plus individuals. So that was kind of another example of, I think, something that my team specifically did really well to try to foster some of that inclusivity. I think in addition, organizations can create things like BRGs or affinity groups to just try to provide those opportunities for connection among employees with similar backgrounds. They can offer leadership development programs that emphasize inclusive leadership skills. They can ensure transparent and inclusive company policies and also establish mentorship and sponsorship programs. And then in addition to all of that, I think one really important thing as well is providing open channels for employee feedback. I think that a lot of times employers think that they know what to do in this space, but sometimes just listening to what your employees need can be, give you some of the most valuable insights. And so
Absolutely.
I think that really listening to your employees and trying to make an effort to actually meet their needs is another really important facet of an inclusive culture.
Absolutely. You're considered an early career. Like you have 3 years experience, 3 to 4,
I'm about 4.5 years into
four
my
and a
career
half,
now.
excuse me, 4.5 years experience right now. What drove you to take the lead on being a part of a BRG? And what were the steps that were taken? Because it seemed like you have significant impact, not just in a BRG, not just making women feel inclusive, but also in the hiring process and so much
Mhm.
more, DE&I, et cetera, et cetera. So what drove you and what were some steps and hurdles that you faced and what advice do you give to those young professionals who want to be a part of something or want to start something within their company, a BRG, or as they call them, employee ERGs in
Mhm.
different companies. And yeah, because it seems like you've found a place where you can actually make an impact apart from the technical impact that you're providing through your day-to-day job, which is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of got lucky in that I had a couple of colleagues who had already started the process of
Hmm.
uh, starting the women's network. And one of them actually went out on maternity leave during that process while they were kind of getting it off the
Okay.
ground. So they asked me to step in and kind of help while she was out. And then once she returned, we just decided that the three of us worked really well together. And so we kind of just kept at it with the three of us. Um, so that opportunity kind of fell into my lap. However, I will say that something that I've always just done throughout my life is when opportunities present themselves, I just say yes, which has, in the past maybe lent itself to me taking on too much. But I think in this particular instance, this was the right choice. It sounded like an opportunity that aligned with my priorities. I think they asked me to step in because they knew that this was something I was passionate about. So I think when the right opportunities present themselves, you should absolutely just go for it and say yes. I mean, none of us really had any idea what we were doing. And then on top of all of that, you asked about kind of challenges that we faced. So
Hmm.
one big thing that happened is we kicked off the process to start this BRG in 2019, and then COVID happened, and we started working from home for a year and a half. So we kind of had some initial momentum in getting people involved in the office, and then everybody started working from home. People felt more disconnected than ever. And so actually one idea that we had, which we partnered with our people and culture team on, is to do like a return to office sort of seminar, if you will. So we worked with a couple of our leaders to talk about, just general challenges that they had faced during COVID, whether that was caring for somebody who had been affected by COVID, or
Hmm.
how working from home had impacted them, their family situations, if they had kids at home. We just kind of created this space for people to talk about how COVID had impacted them and what their fears were in returning to the office. And I think that was a really cool opportunity that we had to hear from our leaders, being vulnerable and sharing their stories. And that was an event that kind of helped us as WIN get some more visibility again back in the organization. So then once we did return to the office, it was kind of like that was our kickoff for returning back to the office. And then we were able to kind of ride that momentum of everybody being excited to come back by providing them with some meaningful opportunities to engage with each other. So again, it's like making the most of your situation and saying yes to things and just kind of rolling with the punches, I think are all really important when it comes to starting something new. And like you said, I mean, I never would have expected to be able to have this kind of impact on the organization unless WIN had kind of come my way. So I think don't underestimate yourself, say yes to stuff and then just see what happens.
That's right. Say yes to stuff. I mean, I guess it was right timing and right place, right timing, as they
Yeah.
say. And also a big part of it is the organization supporting you.
Mm-hmm.
So
100.
yeah, them helping you kind of reinaugurate it when after COVID, and being a support also seems like played a big role on your end, which
Yes.
is awesome.
100%.
That's great. You mentioned that so you tend to say yes to a lot of things, right? You were saying yes, and you eventually realize that there's a lot more on your plate. So since moving to Denver, and how has your perspective on work-life balance evolved, and in what ways has the work culture at BPX impacted both your personal life and overall job satisfaction? And could you share some examples with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think one benefit of living in Denver specifically is that I think the city's sort of ethos really encourages a healthy lifestyle and balance between your work and your personal life. I mean, people are excited to tell you what exciting adventure they have planned over the weekend, or which trail they're planning to crush on their mountain bike after they leave work that day, which I think just helps people feel not ashamed or like they have to hide the fact that they have
Uh-huh.
lives and hobbies outside of work. When I think about like the stereotypes of corporate offices, I picture back in the day where it was all about being the first one in and the last one to leave. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that Denver, as well as just the younger generation in general, are really trying to move away from that and are really focusing on the quality of your contributions rather than just the hours spent at your desk. Um, However, I think another aspect of work-life balance that I don't think gets talked about enough is kind of the mental aspect. I think that when people work in an environment where they feel like they have to compartmentalize their professional and personal identities, that can become extremely draining and lead to burnout and a lack of fulfillment. So I think that if companies can create a psychologically safe environment where people feel safe to bring their whole selves to work, whether that's just their goofy personality or their sexual orientation or their country of origins, customs, and norms, I think people will feel much more fulfilled at work. They won't feel exhausted at the end of the day from maintaining a facade for 8 to 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they'll be more likely to stay engaged and be loyal to that company. So it's really a win-win in that your employees feel happier and they feel like their work more seamlessly integrates with the other aspects of their lives. And employers will also have better employee retention. So I think, one example of how you can do that is BPX actually does these monthly community lunches where everybody comes and has lunch in the cafe together, and you get to meet other people, learn about what other groups do, things like that. And I think that anything that companies can do to just encourage authentic connection between their employees will help kind of fulfill some of that mental work-life balance, where they don't feel like they just are coming to work just to get their job done and go home, where they can finally relax and be themselves. I think that, anything companies can do to help encourage authentic connection and engagement will really help. And I think another example would be the BRGs. So like BPX has WIN, Pride, Energia, Black Collective, Veterans. So everyone has an opportunity to find a community of like-minded individuals. And I think that also helps them feel like they're able to bring their full selves to work and that their unique identity.
All right, Caitlin. Which I 100% agree with is that dual personality, that facade that people have on. And I realize it in my workplace. It's exhausting. It is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely exhausting. And I'm one that will never or can't put on a mask. I'm just who I
Mm-hmm.
am. And that's just it. And I'm glad that you made that point because it is so important for someone to be their full selves. They will bring so much to the team, to the organization, if they do come in as their true self and not just bring in their brilliant
Mm-hmm.
side to them, which is so important. So I'm glad that you touched on that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I actually saw a video recently that resonated with me. I think it was maybe Simon Sinek.
Hmm.
I'm not sure, but it talked about burnout and it talked about how there's actually not a direct correlation between the number of hours that people are working and how burnt out they feel, but there is a correlation between people's level of connection to their work and feeling fulfilled at work and feeling like their work has meaning and purpose. There is a direct correlation between that and reducing burnout. So I think, again, we talk about work-life balance. If you're working your 8 hours a day and you're able to go home at the end of the day and you're not overworking, that might be fine. But if you don't actually care or feel connected to the work that you're doing, you may still find yourself feeling burnt out and you may feel like you don't have good work-life balance. Whereas you could be working 12 plus hours a day, but if it's something that you feel passionate about and that you feel connected to, you're much less likely to feel burnout or like you don't have good work-life balance. So I think kind of the mental piece and the fulfillment piece is critical for long-term success in an organization.
Great. So to summarize, I guess, work-life balance to you is that connectedness
Yeah.
and not really the amount of work that you have and juggling the amount of work you have with your personal life. It's kind of
Yeah.
an all in all put together. Your work
Yeah.
is kind of the culture at your work is kind of represents who you are as a person, and that kind of helps you enjoy and put in the work and not feel burnt out.
Yes, 100%. I think work-life balance really does transcend the physical boundaries of the office.
Which is great. Can you tell us a little bit of what you actually do and what a day in a life looks like for you in the office? What does your work look
Yeah,
like?
absolutely. So I recently, well, I guess not that recently, I've been on the team for a year now. I moved from working as a reservoir engineer on our Eagleford asset to a central team called our subsurface technology team, which you could think of it as kind of a almost like an innovation hub, as well as just a general central sort of technical support team. So we're not tied to any particular asset. We do work that supports all of our different assets. So it's more of a sort of, you could think of it as like a customer facing role where
Okay.
the customers are our business unit. So my day in the life is not as straightforward as it once was because the nature of my work, it changes every day. So in my current role, the reservoir engineers on my team handle like all of our reserves processes. So I do a lot with reserves. I specifically still work with the Eagleford team on reserves. So day to day, that could look like, a variety of different things: reforecasting PDPs, working with the BU on their type curves, things like that. I've also this year had the opportunity to work on some asset development plans, so like some long-term asset depletion plans with our Haynesville team as well as our Eagleford team, and that's been really fulfilling. I also get to work a variety of sort of technical projects. So if there's something, cutting edge or innovative that the teams want to experiment with, I will help support them in, looking at competitor intelligence, figuring out what that technology might look like, how we might apply that to BPX. I also help support the teams with various sort of post-appraisal work. So if we, for example, trialed something new in our completion designs or trialed a new layout or,
Mhm.
are working in something new and kind of more of an appraisal setting, I will help them kind of close the learning loop. So it can be a variety of different things. And a lot of it tends to be kind of longer term, more focused work than what the business units have time for because they're focused on, keeping the rigs running and
Yeah.
doing AFEs, some of the execution focused work. So there's really no short answer for my day in the life because it really does differ day to day, which is exciting. So
And how did you overcome the challenges in moving from one part of the business to a different part? You're in technology now and foster a mindset that allowed you to dig deep and commit to the learning process.
yeah, I will say that, in my old role, I had been in that role for 3.5 years. I felt very established and confident in what I was doing day to day. And I think moving from that to a team of subject matter experts, technical experts, has been honestly a really humbling experience. There have been days where I've questioned my own capabilities and told myself that all of my achievements in my old role were all a fluke and that I'm not really cut out
Oh,
for this, and all of the, classic signs of imposter syndrome. So, just because I know that it's imposter syndrome and that I'm not seeing myself clearly doesn't make it any less difficult or give me sudden clarity or perspective on the situation. So a couple things that I have found most helpful and sort of tangible are two things. One, focusing on my strengths, and two, leaning on my community for support. So, focusing on my strengths during challenging times has been really critical for me because those strengths are constants that don't change from situation to situation. And I think that in times of change, having something that you can anchor on is really important. So, for example, one of my strengths could be that I'm a good communicator. And in
mhm.
my particular situation, being in a central technology team, there is somewhat of a bridge to gap between my team and the business units who, like
Mhm.
I said earlier, we consider kind of our customers. So I can remind myself that although I might still be climbing the technical learning curve, one way that I can immediately add value is by helping my team more effectively communicate externally and upwards with our various stakeholders. So I think by reminding myself that I have unique skills and strengths that are incremental to the existing skill set of my team, that helps me feel reassured that I am, in fact, bringing something to the table here and I'm able to add value while I'm also learning and absorbing a lot of, technical information. And then secondly, I think leaning on my community has been super important to me during this transition period. I mean, sometimes you just need a friend to tell you that you're doing a good job.
Yeah,
Simple as that. And so I think when we're struggling with our confidence or we're feeling overwhelmed by a transition or a new challenge, I do think we lose the ability to see ourselves clearly. And
absolutely.
so I think if you can surround yourself with people who remind you that you're, smart and capable and that you're doing a good job, that can just really help combat some of those feelings of imposter syndrome. So that's kind of been my journey and kind of how I've navigated that admittedly tough transition.
Those are two very valuable points. I mean, focusing on your strengths, we tend to forget that when we're drowning in imposter syndrome, it kind of blocks us. And
Yes,
having a community for sure is always helpful and very important. So thank you for sharing those. Those are two very valuable points.
of course.
And how do you balance the desire for continuous growth and new opportunities within your role? Also another thing is patience is always required. Like you said, like there's a new ladder to climb,
Yeah.
technical ladder to climb. So how do you also maintain patience for that growth?
Um, that one is also undeniably really challenging for me. I mean, I have always been a super ambitious person, and it's really tempting for me to just always be looking ahead to the next opportunity
Mhm.
or achievement. So that is something I've struggled with throughout my career. However, now that I've matured a little bit, I think one thing I've learned over the years, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can probably relate, is that I always think that happiness or fulfillment or career satisfaction is just one, achievement or promotion or bonus away. And then I reach that milestone. It feels great for a second. And then
Yeah,
I just adjust the goalposts. And suddenly I find myself barreling full speed ahead towards the next thing, thinking that, that is going to be what finally brings me that satisfaction that I'm looking for. And I think that now that I've been through that cycle enough times and had the chance to reflect upon those past experiences, I've realized that most of the knowledge and the skills that I'm most proud of that I have today didn't just suddenly appear once I achieved certain things. They came as a result of trying and failing and persevering and pivoting, you know, basically all of the experiences that I had in between the big milestones. So as cliche as it is, I do think it really is about the journey and not just the destination. And there are no shortcuts in life. So you might as well try to get as much as you can out of the journey rather than missing out on the joy and the wisdom that you can gain along the journey because you were so focused on hitting those milestones.
okay. Thank you for that. Focus. It's difficult. It's
It
difficult
is.
to focus on the journey, but that's very valuable. So what tips would you give to the younger professionals on how to stay focused on the personal professional growth? Because especially Gen Z these days, they can go to LinkedIn and see people excelling and taking certifications. And I just did this and I just did that. And these young professionals are like, I can barely do my job in 8 hours. I need another
Mm-hmm.
24 hours to be able to complete a task. And they always feel like they're left behind. So, what tips can you give them to help them maintain their growth without getting overwhelmed by external expectations or the pressure to constantly seek like they need to have a new goalpost right after they hit their goal and actually appreciate the goal they just achieved and reflect and sit and learn from that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, something I say all the time, and anyone who listens to this who knows me personally is probably going to roll their eyes because they've heard it so many times, is that we compare our insides to other people's outsides. And what I
Right.
mean by that is that when we look at our own lives, we see not just the successes and achievements, but also the mess and the struggles and the hardships and anxiety that we experienced getting there. Whereas when we look at other people's lives, we don't see any of that stuff. We only see the
Absolutely.
successes. And so, we just have to remember that the struggles and the hardships that others experience are not always visible to us, just like ours aren't to them. And so I think recognizing this sort of illusion of comparison is really important. You know, the images and the achievements that people share on social media and LinkedIn are only part of the story. You can never fully grasp the complete picture of someone's experiences. You know, for example, like this podcast, I'm sure people will
Mhm.
see me on a podcast and think, oh, wow, that's so cool. She went on a podcast. But what they don't see is me, you know, laying awake at night, panicking that I'm going to say something stupid or, you know, whatever, all the nerves and anxiety that I had leading up to it. So I think it's just important to remember that what we're seeing is not the full picture. And I think kind of a tangible way that we can combat that is rather than trying to measure your success against those external benchmarks, I've personally found that really looking inwards and identifying my core values and aligning my actions and my decisions with those core values
Mhm.
really helps me to avoid that trap of comparison. And I think that when you're living in alignment with your values, and like I said before, you have a loving community that helps you do
Mhm.
that and that celebrates you for that, you'll find a genuine sense of accomplishment and deep fulfillment, which ultimately reduces the need to measure your success against others.
Thank you for that. That was great. Um, it is important to reflect. I think young professionals, I think it's an age thing. It's an age thing and it's an experience thing. And as young professionals, I don't think most of them have the experience yet or the wisdom
Mm-hmm.
or the wisdom to actually sit and reflect and make sure that their values align with what they're doing and their goals and the culture of a company, as to speak. So those are very valuable points.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree. And what I always tell myself as well is like, you know, I would never want to be in a situation where I get promoted, for example, and I got there because I, you know, faked my way there or skipped
Absolutely.
over the important lessons and experience that I needed to get there. And so what I tell myself as well to help myself stay kind of focused and patient is that, you know, those opportunities will come when I'm ready for them. And by being ready for them, that will ensure that I'm more successful in those opportunities if and when they do actually play out, as opposed to just trying so hard to keep up and, you know, rush through my career and then finding myself suddenly feeling like, oh gosh, I'm way out of my depth here. I don't have experience to draw
Hmm.
upon. So I think also, you know, picture your future self and picture them, you know, having all the wisdom and experience that they need in order to do those, you know, bigger and better jobs, you know, even better than what you could right now. I think that, you know, that helps me stay patient because I think I would never want to be in a situation where I was accidentally, you know, thrust into a situation too early and don't actually have the meaningful experiences to draw upon to make sure that I'm successful in those roles.
But you also need to understand that sometimes we're blinded and we really can't see what our capabilities are. And
That is
when
true.
a trusted manager um, puts you in that position, we also need to trust that, okay, they see something in us. I'm gonna say
Absolutely.
yes, going back to your yes, and
Exactly.
figure out why they believed in me and go for it. So it's
Yeah.
also a balance between what the manager, your employer, how they see you and how you see yourself too.
Yeah. 100%. I agree with that.
Um, Putting yourself in the shoes of an employer now, how can the employer themselves, say you were in the employer, and from their perspective, how do you think they can invest in young professionals, make sure that they stay patient, and trust the process because these days you see them, they want to jump from opportunity
Mhm.
to opportunity because they're impatient and they want to climb that ladder so fast. So,
Yeah.
from an employer's perspective, what do you think and how do you think they can invest in these young professionals without seeming like they have to babysit them? Because it does seem like so that they are babysitting these young professionals and they just need constant validation. Um, so how would you do that? How would you approach that situation?
Yeah. I think that effectively investing in younger employees involves more than just, you know, formal training and development opportunities. I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I do think it requires creating an environment that fosters organic growth and learning without feeling like that constant supervision is necessary. So I think a strategy you can use is to kind of facilitate mentorship, facilitate peer learning opportunities wherever you can, whether that's through things like BRGs or ERGs, lunch and learns, community events, experiences that allow younger employees to sort of organically expand their networks and learn from experienced colleagues. I think that, if you invest in mentorship and community building, you can help nurture young talent and nurture their drive and their energy without feeling like you have to have excessive oversight or micromanagement. I think, similar to what I experienced with starting WIN, I did that because that was something I was passionate about, because the organization provided an avenue for me to express that, passion. And through that experience, I've learned so many valuable lessons. I've gotten to engage with other colleagues who are much more experienced than I am, who have way different perspectives than I do. And so I think for me, that experience has been valuable, not because I think it's going to help me climb the ladder or whatever it is, but because it helps me feel actually connected to my work. And I think ultimately that's what younger employees are looking for when they have all this energy. And I think it gets perceived as them wanting to climb the ladder, but I think a lot of it is just them wanting to feel like they have autonomy and, can actually make an impact on their organization. And I think you need to keep in mind that, younger employees have, since a very young age, had a world of information at their fingertips, and they do have really valuable perspectives that they can offer, even if it's not in their actual technical roles. Maybe it's just in terms of influencing the culture or the DE&I culture. I mean, younger employees are much more well-versed these days in DE&I than probably some of the older generations who didn't grow up around all that. So I think, giving them the autonomy and the freedom to make an impact in ways that are meaningful to them will help kind of satisfy that hunger and that drive that a lot of younger employees have.
That's very valuable. But now I'm thinking of, there's two different generations that are going to be clashing. The older generation and this young generation now. That this younger generation needs the mentorship and needs the connection from the older generation. They need to learn from these experienced professionals, but they might not have the same ideologies or ways of communication, ways of work. How, in your experience, how have you managed that? And what advice would you give young professionals as well as these more experienced professionals, and really managing and being patient with the young professionals and teaching them and communicating and kind of creating that workplace, because that can also be an issue.
Yeah, I think what is most important is that you lead with empathy always. I think that something that I have to remind myself often is that, most people show up at work every day and they want to do a good job and they want to positively impact the people around them. I mean, majority of people are not going to work every day saying, I want to make everybody else miserable and, whatever it is. So I think that, having empathy and understanding that someone else has a completely different set of experiences that are guiding them is so important. And just remembering that, we don't have all the answers. So that's on both sides, right? So I think for younger employees, being patient with more experienced colleagues who maybe, I don't know, maybe they're not as tech savvy, but, they grew up in a different kind of environment where, they were able to learn a lot and they have, maybe more fundamentals and things that they can teach. So I think just recognizing that everybody has something valuable to offer. I think the same thing when, with the older generation looking at Gen Zs, I think it's really easy to poke fun at, these young kids and, oh my gosh, they don't know anything yet. And, it's easy for them to be really jaded. But I think also from their standpoint, reminding yourself that, the younger employees, they want to come in, they want to make a difference. No, they don't know everything yet. But rather than, pushing back against them or trying to subdue them, I think if you can help try to foster their, energy and curiosity and do something with it, that is going to ultimately lead to a much more productive working relationship than having an us versus them mindset. And actually, an example, BPX brought in Dr. Clarence Hill Jr., I think is his name, who has this book called The Dream Clock. And one of the kind of guiding principles of that is this us versus them mentality. So that's been something that BPX has been really leaning into recently. And just overall, not looking at situations from, a them being against us, but rather all of us working together, I think can be really positive for your overall work culture. So I guess to summarize, I think leading with empathy and remembering that everyone else has something to teach us, and that they're just, doing the best with what they have, just like we are, I think is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. And it's a we environment. It's not them versus us,
Yes,
which is
exactly.
great. So if you were given the privilege to implement changes in the traditional workplace structure to better suit the preferences of younger generations, what changes would you make? I think you hit a lot of that, but other than creating communities, what
Mm-hmm.
changes would you make?
Yeah, I'm lucky to work for a company that embraces flexible working arrangements. And I think, that's a topic that's on everyone's mind right now. But I ultimately do think that that is the direction that the world is heading in. And the younger generation, more than any previous generation, sees it as more of a requirement than just a nice to have. So I think that offering flexible working arrangements can help companies really meet the diverse needs and preferences of the younger generation, who often appreciate more of kind of an adaptable and autonomous work environment. And I think on that note, and I know we've kind of hit on it, but I do think that giving younger employees more autonomy and responsibility earlier on in their careers. So that could look like something like what I've experienced with getting to be a co-lead for a BRG, within my first year of working. I think that does help them feel like they're making a meaningful impact at work.
Okay.
And I think one characteristic of Gen Z, maybe even more so than of other generations, is that they really do want to feel connected to their work and have opportunities to influence the culture of their workplace. I mean, culture is more important to Gen Z than it ever has been to any other generation. Studies have shown that culture is like one of the number one characteristics that Gen Z looks for in a workplace. So I think if you can allow the younger generation to influence the culture, that's going to ensure that you stay attractive and competitive to future, talent that is kind of in your pipeline. Again, I think early career employees have a lot of energy. They're fresh out of school and they want to make a difference. So do what you can to harness that, and give them those opportunities to shine and differentiate themselves. And again, tenure and experiences is definitely valuable, but I think Gen Z does have valuable perspectives to offer outside of just their perspectives within their technical discipline. So I think giving them opportunities to showcase those other skill sets and have a direct impact on the culture will help keep them engaged.
Thank you for that. And lastly, if Caitlin could go back in time and give advice to herself on where she'd be in the next 5 years, which is almost where you are now, what advice would
Mm-hmm.
you give yourself?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough question. Oh man, I think I would go back again to the patience piece. I think
Okay.
that, now that I've had a couple of years under my belt, I am really starting to understand the value that just having experience brings. So I think I would tell myself, stop rushing, try to just stick with it and learn what you can from every single situation. I would also tell myself that I don't need to be perfect all the time. I think when I first started my career, I felt like I had to be just perfect in every situation. I couldn't stumble in a presentation or people were going to judge me. I just told myself all these really unhelpful messages about what I needed to be. And I think that I actually held myself back from growth because I was trying so hard to create this external image of perfection and achievement. One example is like, I think because I wanted to come out of school and prove that I knew all of this reservoir engineering stuff, I did not ask as many questions as I should have early on. And so I think one piece of advice I would have for myself is like, ask more questions. People expect that when you're fresh out of school, you're not going to know everything, and that's okay. But I think I was holding myself to this unrealistic standard of being this, standout new grad who suddenly knew everything, which is just unreasonable. And I think that, if I could go back, I would have embraced a lot more of the uncertainty and the imperfection and the vulnerability. And I would have reached out for more help. I would have, asked technical experts to teach me things and just sit down with me. And it's not to say I didn't do those things, but I think I, at the time, felt embarrassed that, I didn't know everything yet. And in hindsight, that's just so ridiculous. And as a matter of fact, now that I've had the opportunity to mentor some other employees, I actually love when younger employees, or even just employees that are new to my discipline, approach me for help. It makes me feel good about myself, like I have something to offer them. So I wish I knew that before. I wish I knew that people would have been actually pleased to have me come to them and ask for help. So that would probably be a big one, is like, ask for help and don't hold yourself to this unrealistic standard of perfection, because no one is perfect.
I did catch you off guard in that question, but those are very, 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 very important
No, that's
realizations. Okay. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
Of
And now finally, we've reached the end. So I have a list of 5 fire rapid questions that are going to be answered in this or that format. Feel free to elaborate on the answers if you want. No problem.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to start. Which aspect of the energy industry currently appeals to you? The charm of potential overseas assignments or the satisfaction of local impact?
Oh, man. That's a really tough one. I think right now, probably the local impact, because I think that the US onshore shale environment is a really exciting place to be right now. So I'm comfortable where I'm at.
Right. Which perspective do you think aligns more with your personal experience? The Gen Z mentality of always seeking the next thing or finding contentment in the present?
Probably always seeking the next thing.
Okay. With all of that you gave us right now.
I know. I have to give that advice to myself too.
Yeah, we do. We do. We got to give ourselves those pep talks too. Which side do you think needs more attention in the workplace? Gen Z feeling invested in by employers or employers being concerned about retaining talent?
I think Gen Z feeling invested in by employers, because I think that will solve the other problem.
I agree with you on that. Embracing work-life balance or dedicating extra time to career development?
I'm somewhere in the middle on that. I think you can have both. Maybe that's a cheat answer, but I think, kind of to my point earlier, if you can find opportunities for career development outside of work that bring you fulfillment, then you will still feel like you have good work-life balance.
I agree. I was going to say that. I will definitely grant you that middle answer because that is just what that is what you spoke about. So I agree. Which suits your energy levels better? Starting your workday with early morning meetings or having late night brainstorm sessions?
Definitely early morning meetings.
You're an early morning person.
Yeah, my brain turns to scrambled eggs in the afternoon.
Okay, awesome. I'm a morning person too. I enjoy getting done with my day and getting early start. All right, well, that's all I have for you, Caitlin. Thank you so much for all your valuable insights. Thank you for being a guest on Energy If You Know You Know. And we'll be sure to follow you on LinkedIn and keep up with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right. See ya.
Bye.